The moment a name enters a public sex offender registry, it stops being just a personal downfall and becomes a permanent, searchable record of harm, one that reshapes reputations, institutions, and the broader conversation about accountability. Before going any further, take a second to like, share, and subscribe so more people can stay informed on stories like this that demand attention and awareness. That is now the reality for Robert Preston Morris, a once celebrated evangelical leader whose influence spanned decades, continents, and millions of followers. His permanent placement on the Texas Sex Offender Registry marks not just the conclusion of a criminal case, but the beginning of a lifelong legal and social consequence that will follow him indefinitely. It is a development that forces uncomfortable questions about power, trust, delayed justice, and the structures that allow abuse to remain hidden for years. Robert Morris is now permanently listed on the Texas Sex Offender Registry, a designation that carries weight far beyond symbolic punishment. Unlike temporary legal penalties that fade with time, registry placement functions as an enduring public record, one that cannot be erased by reputation management, institutional loyalty, or personal reinvention. In Texas, the registry is designed as a tool of public safety, allowing communities to access information about individuals convicted of sexual offenses. Morris's inclusion on this list is not provisional or subject to future removal. It is final. His name now exists in a system that is searchable by anyone, neighbors, employers, religious organizations, or concerned citizens, ensuring that the record of his crimes remains visible. This permanence reflects a broader shift in how legal systems address sexual offenses, particularly those involving minors. Historically, many offenders were able to rebuild their lives with limited public scrutiny after serving their sentences. Registries changed that dynamic by prioritizing transparency over rehabilitation anonymity. In Morris's case, the registry represents a formal acknowledgement that his actions carry consequences that extend far beyond the courtroom. It is a mechanism that ensures accountability does not end when a sentence is completed. For a man who once stood on stages speaking about morality and leadership, the contrast is stark. His identity is now tied not to sermons or books, but to a legal classification that will persist for life. The reason for this lifetime designation is rooted in the age of the victim, Cindy Clemisher, who was 12 years old at the time the abuse began. Under Texas law, offenses involving minors below a certain age trigger mandatory lifetime registration. This is not a discretionary decision made by a judge or influenced by public opinion. It is codified in statute. The law recognizes that crimes against children carry a distinct severity, one that warrants ongoing monitoring and public awareness. The rationale is both protective and preventative. Younger victims are considered particularly vulnerable, and offenses against them are treated as among the most serious. This legal framework underscores a key principle: some actions carry consequences that cannot be time-limited. The age of the victim becomes a defining factor in determining the scope of accountability. In Morris's case, Clemisher's age at the time of the abuse removes any possibility of eventual removal from the registry. There is no pathway to petition for delisting, no period after which the record can be sealed. The law draws a clear line, emphasizing that the harm inflicted on a child creates a permanent obligation for the offender. This permanence is not about retribution alone. It reflects an understanding of the long-term impact of such abuse on victims, whose lives are often shaped by trauma that does not fade with time. Morris's legal accountability was formalized when he pleaded guilty to 5 felony counts of child sexual abuse. A guilty plea carries significant implications. It is not merely an admission of wrongdoing. It is a legal acknowledgement that removes ambiguity about the facts of the case. For years, allegations had circulated, met with denial and minimization. Courtroom became the space where those narratives were resolved under oath and within the framework of the law. By pleading guilty, Morris accepted responsibility for the charges, and those admissions are now part of the permanent public record. The number of counts, 5, also matters. Each count represents a separate instance of criminal behavior, collectively painting a picture of repeated abuse rather than a singular lapse in judgment. In legal terms, multiple counts often influence sentencing and reinforce the severity of the offense. In public perception, they challenge narratives that attempt to frame such cases as isolated incidents. The guilty plea closed the door on denial, replacing speculation with documented fact. It also provided a form of validation for the victim, whose claims were no longer contested but confirmed within a legal proceeding. Despite the gravity of the offenses, Morris served a 6-month sentence in Osage County Jail, a duration that has sparked discussion about proportionality in sentencing. 6 months is a finite period, one that contrasts sharply with the lifelong consequences of registry placement. His release, which occurred slightly before the full term was completed, marked the end of his incarceration but not the end of his punishment. Early release is not uncommon in the criminal justice system, often influenced by factors such as good behavior or administrative decisions. However, in cases involving serious offenses, it can raise questions about whether the system adequately reflects the severity of the crime. The brevity of the jail sentence highlights a broader tension within the justice system, the difference between punitive measures and ongoing accountability. While incarceration is the most visible form of punishment, it is not the only one. In Morris's case, the registry, probation, and civil litigation collectively create a framework of consequences that extend far beyond those 6 months. The jail term may have been limited, but the overall impact of his conviction is anything but. Financial restitution is another component of that accountability. Court ordered Morris to pay $270,000 to Cindy Clemisher, a sum intended to acknowledge the harm she endured. Restitution serves both symbolic and practical purposes. It is a formal recognition that the victim suffered damages, and it provides financial support that may assist with recovery, therapy, or other needs. However, no monetary amount can fully compensate for the emotional and psychological impact of abuse. Payment is not a resolution but a component of justice, one that attempts to address harm within the limits of the legal system. The requirement for Morris to register as a sex offender involves more than a one-time listing. It imposes ongoing obligations that structure his daily life. Every 3 months, he must appear in person to verify his information with authorities. This quarterly reporting ensures that his details remain current and that law enforcement maintains oversight. Any change in residence, employment, or personal status must be reported promptly. These requirements create a continuous interaction with the legal system, reinforcing the idea that accountability is not a past event but an ongoing condition. Public nature of the registry amplifies this accountability. Morris's name, photograph, address, and details of his offenses are accessible to anyone who searches the database. This transparency is designed to inform communities, but it also carries significant social consequences. Public knowledge of his status may affect where he can live, work, or participate in community activities. For someone who once led a large congregation, the shift from public admiration to public scrutiny is profound. The registry does not allow for anonymity or reinvention. It preserves the record in a way that remains visible and accessible. Before his guilty plea, Morris denied the allegations, a response that is not uncommon in high-profile cases. Denial can serve multiple purposes: protecting personal reputation, maintaining institutional stability, or buying time in the face of accusations. However, when a case proceeds to court and results in a guilty plea, those earlier denials are often revisited and reinterpreted. They become part of the narrative, raising questions about credibility and the processes that allowed the allegations to persist without resolution for so long. Transition from denial to admission is significant. Marks a shift from contesting the narrative to accepting legal responsibility. In Morris's case, this shift occurred in a courtroom under conditions that required formal acknowledgement of the facts. Contrast between his earlier statements and his eventual plea underscores the complexity of such cases, where public perception and legal reality can diverge until evidence is examined within a judicial framework. Beyond the criminal case, Morris is involved in ongoing legal battles that extend the story into the civil arena. He has filed a lawsuit seeking compensation from Gateway Church, claiming financial entitlements related to his tenure. At the same time, Cindy Clemisher has filed a defamation lawsuit against Morris, his wife, and church leadership, alleging that false statements were made to protect the institution. These civil cases introduce additional layers of complexity, shifting the focus from criminal accountability to questions of financial responsibility, reputation, and institutional conduct. Civil litigation operates under different standards than criminal cases, often focusing on damages and liability rather than guilt. These proceedings can take years to resolve, prolonging public attention and potentially revealing new information. They also highlight the interconnected nature of personal actions and institutional responses. The outcome of these cases may influence not only the individuals involved but also broader discussions about how organizations handle allegations of misconduct. Gateway Church itself has undergone significant changes in response to the scandal. Leadership restructuring, new governance models, and efforts to rebuild trust are part of the institution's attempt to move forward. Such changes are not unique. Organizations facing crises often implement reforms to address failures and prevent future incidents. However, rebuilding trust is a complex process, particularly when the allegations involve long-standing leadership and significant influence. The restructuring of Gateway Church reflects an acknowledgement that the impact of the scandal extends beyond the individual. Institutions are shaped by their leaders, and when those leaders are implicated in wrongdoing, the consequences ripple outward. Congregations, staff, and associated communities must grapple with the implications, often re-evaluating their understanding of authority and accountability. The process of rebuilding involves not only structural changes but also cultural shifts, as organizations seek to create environments where transparency and accountability are prioritized. The broader lessons of this case are difficult but necessary to confront. Legal accountability does not end with a prison sentence. It can extend into lifelong obligations that shape every aspect of an individual's life. Victim testimony plays a crucial role in bringing cases to light, particularly when allegations involve powerful figures. Public registries serve as tools of transparency, ensuring that information remains accessible and that communities can make informed decisions. Institutional influence, while significant, does not guarantee immunity from consequences. And civil cases, often overshadowed by criminal proceedings, can continue to shape outcomes long after a verdict is reached. At its core, this story is about the intersection of power, accountability, and persistence. It began with a decision by Cindy Clemisher to come forward, a choice that carried significant personal risk. Her testimony set in motion a chain of events that led to a guilty plea, a criminal sentence, financial restitution, and permanent registry placement. It also prompted institutional change and ongoing legal battles that continue to unfold. Permanence of Morris's placement on the sex offender registry ensures that this case will not fade quietly into history. It will remain a reference point, a documented example of how the legal system addresses such offenses and how accountability can extend far beyond initial punishment. For those who followed his career, it represents a dramatic shift from influence to infamy. For those examining the broader implications, it offers a case study in the complexities of justice, the role of public transparency, and the enduring impact of individual actions. In the end, the story reinforces a fundamental truth. Actions have consequences that cannot always be confined to a single moment or a finite sentence. They ripple outward, affecting individuals, institutions, and communities in ways that are often unpredictable and long-lasting. Understanding those consequences requires looking beyond the headlines and examining the structures, laws, and human experiences that shape such cases. If you found this deep dive valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can stay informed on stories that matter.